Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining this episode of the podcast with LogiSense. And today we have Jagan Reddy here from RightRev. And I wonder maybe you could give an introduction to yourself and RightRev and what you guys do.
Great. Thanks, Tim. This is Jagan Reddy. I'm the CEO founder at RightRev, and we build software to handle the revenue recognition automation process, whether it's a complex revenue recognition or a simple revenue recognition, any business model. Our software can handle all the automation requirements from ASC 606 and IFRS 15.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I know you're not new to this space at all. I know you have created a company in the past that was acquired around revenue recognition. And I know, like every time when you're going through it the second time around, there's always learnings from the past that you're applying to the new time around. And I'm just curious on what lessons that you've learned in the past and those sorts of things, and how you're applying and doing things a little bit differently now with RightRev.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. This is my second time building a revenue recognition software. The one I built before was like 10 years ago, which was acquired by another firm. There are like quite a good amount of lessons that we have learned, and we are trying to implement that in RightRev. We've implemented a lot, and we're continuing to improve as we continue to build the product as well. Few lessons that I would like to share in this podcast. The number one is one size doesn't fit all, and you can't force fit your customer use case with what your software can do. So if you just take a technology companies that sells software, hardware, and services, like kind of a traditional model, even the way they package, they price, and how they negotiate their contracts, it completely changes how each company does the revenue recognition process. If you look at each business in the tech space, they run several variations of revenue recognition policies. And once again, it all depends on their pricing, packaging, and how they deliver their services as well. So to handle this huge amount of variations in the use cases, you need to build a robust rules engine framework. If you don't have that rules engine that allows customers to configure how their policies need to work, then you cannot really handle the revenue recognition process for your customers. The second lesson is, once you have the framework, now you need your software and the infrastructure to handle a huge amount of data. Businesses these days are processing millions and billions of transactions every month. And while you process all this transaction, they also expect you to allow them to close their books in a short period of time and then do the reporting. There are several things that follow the close. So the CFOs are super focused on how to reduce their close cycle. Several companies try to do most of the invoicing in the month end. Now you have to do the invoicing in the month end, then you have to do the revenue recognition process and then close their books. All this can add a lot of time. You can always go and continue to improve your processes and do things faster. But if your software slows you down, then you lose a lot of time in your close process, and that's going to delay things. So we have make sure that RightRev can handle billions of transactions in a short period of time. So we don't impact our customers' ability to close the books. That's another big goal, which we were not able to do before quite well. And now we are handling at an amazing scale. And the third one is the most important, what I feel, especially in the AI world where we live right now. You cannot be 99% correct when you process revenue. Your customers expect you to be always 100% correct. So you can go wrong. There's no room for errors, because once you report the revenue to the street, and then you cannot backtrack saying something went wrong, my revenue is incorrect. Even if you're a private company, you can go back to your investors who invest in your company and say, oh, we recognized our revenue incorrect. Now we are like 10 million short or 100 million short. You can't do all that. So customers expect you to be 100% correct. So what that means is whatever we build and deliver, it needs to be tested for every different use cases so detailed so our customers can rely on the software to make sure their revenue is correct. Now, we couldn't do all these three things that I mentioned so far very well in our first gen product due to technology limitation. Now, in the last 10 years, things have changed. We have come to the AI world now. There's a lot of advancement in the technology. So with RightRev, we have picked up the best in technologies that can scale and handle the volume. It allows us to build a better framework, and it also allows customers to see that everything is running 100% correct. So I would say, to summarize, those are the three big lessons that we have learned and we have incorporated within our next gen writer product.
That's fantastic. And I think, you hit a couple of things there that were really interesting around complexity and scale. Like these are real challenges. Like we are seeing people wanting so much flexibility in their pricing, right? Deal specific pricing, deal specific contracts, all these different sorts of things. And then the amount of usage data and stuff that's coming in that's being calculated across these things kind of exasperates that. And if that's not automated and 100% correct, it just creates chaos in that end of the month for being able to try to get those books closed.
Very well agreed. And especially in the, like you talked about, in the usage-based and consumption business models, the vast amount of data that's coming in and the complication that contracts that's being negotiated, how do you rate those usage data? How do you feed that into the billing systems? How do you feed that into revenue recognition system? They get like super complicated, and the vast amount of data doesn't even allow you to do any of this in spreadsheet. You need to have a properly orchestrated systems that can handle your billing, your revenue, all of that together. And also especially how do you ensure the data is being sent to all the systems properly? Like how do you ensure like you're not missing some data? You send something to billing, you forget to send it to revenue. How do you make sure all this is getting transmitted to the right systems in the right way, and they are processing the right data as well? We see those complications. So first of all, it takes you out of the spreadsheet world. You just can't handle this in spreadsheet. Now, coming into the systems, you can't use a system that can only do half the work, and then you can do rest half of the work in spreadsheet. Even that's going to be a nightmare for the accountants.
Well, I think something that we just keep seeing more and more of, and it's becoming more prevalent a lot with AI and the way that people are pricing is that they are starting to take a look more towards consumption-based, token-based, outcome-based. And what we get a lot of feedback from companies is that this is, they've lived in the world of SaaS and seat-based subscriptions, right? And now they're making this addition to their portfolio of managing usage. And I think there's some unique challenges that come around with that from a revenue recognition. And there's a lot of fear and a lot of worry from some of the different people in those organizations. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to a little bit of some of the uniquenesses or scenarios or customers that you've come across where you're dealing with this kind of hybrid pricing or usage-based pricing and things that you're kind of working with those organizations on.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the AI companies, there's like 25 plus different pricing methods we are seeing today. Like you say, like there's a simple usage base, there's an outcome base, there's a headcount base, conversation base. There's so many different ways of how people can price and package. It depends on what's best for the business and what is best for the customers as well. So they're looking at all aspects of it. But now when you negotiate these contracts, there are rates based on tiers, like how much you're using, like a cumulative consumption business model. You're looking at how much they're using and you're adjusting the pricing as you go. And you're also giving a lot of free consumption to your customers and say, okay, you can use this much of free tester product, and then you can start paying for this. Now, those free can be consumed upfront or they are consumed over the time of your contract. So there are different ways. How do you take those usage data and then you account for revenue recognition? And the third, when you're doing these type of pricings, sometime you pay for all this consumption upfront and you continue to draw down on those consumption. By the end of the contract, you may have consumed everything or you may have some leftovers. Now, those are called like rollovers. Like, how do you take those leftover consumption credits that you have and move it to the renewal contract? So we call that as the rollovers that happen. Now, these complexities can make your contract modification painful. Your billing can become very painful. And on top of all of this, when you have a complexity in contract modification and billing, the revenue recognition also goes haywire. So this is where in RightRev, especially, we continue to work with our customers to understand their pricing and packaging, how they are doing. And we have built a dedicated engine, revenue recognition engine, just for the consumption business. And now we are continuing to enhance that engine to handle all the different variations in the AI.
It's wonderful, because I think one of the ones that pops up, like you said, there's the drawdown ones, which are fantastic from a contracting perspective, but then what if they didn't use everything that they had paid for, right? Now, what do you do in those scenarios? And I think the other one that we find people wondering about a lot from a revenue recognition from usage is, well, how do I handle overage, right? So we get some, we have some customers that might not get all of the usage data that's come through until, and they're trying to close out the books. And then I find out that they used overage and that comes in maybe a month later or something like that I got back from like a carrier or a wireless provider. And now I need to figure out what I'm doing with overage. So I don't know if it's similar on how you have to manage and deal with, well, I haven't used everything out of my consumption drawdown, or if I've got overage. Just wondering how you work with your customers to deal with those kind of, the needle is above or below, what was originally committed in the contract.
Yeah, no, those are the two big complexity we see, and it varies from business to business what we've seen. Some business clearly says, like, if you haven't used anything, you lose it. You can't carry over to your next contract. Some business will say you can roll over into the next contract. We allow you to do that. Now, when you roll over into the next contract, you can either amend your contract with the leftover amount, but you only bill for the new contract amount. You don't bill for the rollover because the customer has already paid for it. Now, from a writer perspective, in the revenue recognition, we bring in the data, we understand what is the rollover amount, what is the new contract amount, and then when the usage data comes in, you apply those usages to begin with to the rollover, or you combine them and recognize them. It all depends on the configuration, how the customer needs. Sometimes what happens is your rollover from the previous contract can be on a different rate, and then the new contracts, the new consumption credits that you buy, that can be on a different rate. So you need to have proper mechanism to rate them properly. And then how do you recognize them in the revenue? That need to be configured properly. Otherwise, the system is going to combine all of them and maybe apply the new rate, which may not be correct. So this is where our engine comes into play for a customer to configure, okay, how do you want to handle rollover? Do you want to consume all the rollover credits first and then go to the new contract, or you want to combine them and do it? So that's what we see in the rollover. If the contract says you lose it by the end of the contract, whether you use it or not, then at the end of the contract, the system will automatically recognize all the revenue that's out there in the contract. You have invoiced the customer already. Your customers paid for it, but from a revenue recognition perspective, we just recognize everything at the end of the contract. Now, if you're going to give a credit for some reason, assume you work with your customer, you agree to give a credit, then there will be a credit process which will kind of cancel out the remaining contract value if you're willing to give a credit. So that's kind of from a leftover consumption that they have not used, how to handle it. Now, when it comes into the overages, there is multiple variations of overages we see. If you have a monthly minimum that the customer has to use, there can be usage there where you're not waiting for the end of the contract or end of consuming everything to figure out what is usage, overage. You can look at overage every month as well. Like, are you going over than monthly commitment? Then you consider them as overage. Or you allow the customer to continue to consume everything, and the end of the consumption, anything goes above the contracted consumption, those are considered as overages. So you can look at both. Overages typically have a contracted pricing that'll be much higher than what you have contracted or bought upfront for the consumption. So those are tracked separate, they are rated separate, and their revenue recognition has to be also tracked separate because customers would like to understand how much revenue is coming from their contracted services versus the overage services.
And I think, I want to hit on something that you talked about earlier around like the importance of having rules-based and configuration-based revenue recognition compared to, you can't run this stuff in a spreadsheet anymore. And then, a lot of the companies that we work with are doing very large enterprise SaaS deals, right? And we all know, customers will, well, in order to get this contracted price, I'll commit to buying 10,000 seats by this date, and then a rollout of something from another date and another commitment. And there might be all these different kind of scheduled commitments that are out there that are promises from the customer to be able to get the deal done. And like you said, maybe you can speak a little bit to around the importance of being able to configure rules around specific contracts like that to make sure that you're getting that 100% correct of the information coming out the other end.
Yeah, I mean, this is the most complicated process within revenue recognition, but now it's coming down to billing as well, because the billing system also needs to now understand the contract modification to make sure what are the newly negotiated contract terms, rates, and everything, and make sure they're billing based on all the latest negotiated contract terms. For revenue recognition, this has been a challenge for a very long period, even before all the AI came in, because contract modification always triggers recalculation of revenue, because it all depends on what customer is buying. If they're canceling, they're adding new, they're renewing something. It depends on the contract modification. These complexities continue to snowball contract by contract. So it is a painful process. So within the overall order to cash or revenue process, we clearly tell our customer, when you do this contract modification, try to reason them in the system properly, like tag them properly. Like, what kind of modification is it? Like, is the customer trying to add on something, or they're renewing their contract, or they're canceling something? Even in cancel, we look at, is this going to be a full cancel or a partial cancel? What are they canceling? And now with the multiple elements coming into play, sometimes the customer is using one service, and then in between the contract, they come in, add a different service, which might be completely different. Like, you're having a consumption-based service, and then you come and add a one-time service. All this kind of changes the dynamic of revenue recognition process. So in RightRev, we built a framework for contract modification with the reason codes. So the customers will come in and define all their contract modification and reason codes, and then they will define how to calculate the revenue, what to cancel that has happened before, and how to recalculate. This is all completely configurable within RightRev.
Very good, very good. And you know what, we've been talking a lot about, AI, and the pricing around AI has been driving a lot of change in around, the usage-based pricing. But I'm curious from your perspective, where do you see kind of AI evolving in the rev rec and billing space, kind of like from forecasting, anomaly detection, these sorts of things? Just curious on where you're seeing some of this start to come into this industry.
One of the common theme that I'm seeing between the billing and revenue system in where the AI is going to play a big role is going to be in the consumption revenue forecasting, consumption billing forecasting, right? How much is your customer going to use your services? Um, that's going to become a big task for the CFOs to understand how is their next month going to look? How is their next quarter going to look? Now, in a SaaS world, it's very easy because you have all your contracts with the contract terms. You know what is your working revenue. You can easily forecast your revenue. But in the consumption world, you have to look at your consumption history to build your consumption forecast. Now, consumption history can be very different. There can be seasonality to it. There can be different factors impacting the consumption. So now you have to run through an AI forecasting model, feeding all your consumption historical data and coming up with a more accurate consumption forecast for the future. And now when you create this forecast, you also need to track how the actuals are happening against your forecast and continue to fine tune your AI model. So it is a very challenging task, but it is going to be one of the highly demanding need for most of these AI companies and anybody that are getting into the consumption business.
Nice. So I think one of the things that that we deal with a lot too, right, is in that forecasting. And this is one of the things that a lot of times when we're working with usage-based companies, forecasting is a big, it's a big unknown, we'll call it, right? Because they haven't dealt with it before, right? Whereas, like you said, it's all based off historical and knowledge around your seasonability, how your customers use your product. I mean, we've been great. Our head of finance is like the last 3 years came within like 2% of forecasts, right? Of those, but that's all based off of history and experience and knowledge. And like I think I agree with you 100%. Like, can we train some of these AI agents to have that knowledge and that history to get more and more and more accurate on that forecasting, and anything that can be done to help companies making that transition or addition to usage-based models will be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also this consumption AI models are going to be a little different from a billing perspective and revenue perspective. So for example, from a billing perspective, customer might buy all these consumption credits upfront. So from a billing perspective, you know they've bought everything upfront, you can forecast. But to give a true revenue forecast, you're heavily dependent on the usage data. And I would say the billing systems may not understand the usage data from a revenue perspective. They understand the usage data from a billing perspective. They kind of forecast from the billing perspective. But RightRev will have the ability and all the data points that will accurately forecast from a revenue perspective. So the customers have to run two different forecasts. One forecast doesn't fit in this world for billing and revenue. It needs to be two different forecasts for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that leads me in. I think it'd be great to get a final thought from you, because it's right on the same topic, that if you were talking to a CFO today that is implementing both usage-based billing and a revenue recognition system, what kind of advice would you give to that person?
And the first thing we always say is don't underestimate the upstream process that's happening. So even if they're looking at billing, it doesn't start at billing. It starts even earlier than that, right? Like you're looking at your CPQ process, how your products are structured, how you're negotiating your contract terms, your pricing and packaging and delivery, kind of all this comes into play. So that data that gets bundled in your CPQ and then that flows into the billing and revenue system is going to be super important. Now, from a CFO perspective, they are not into the details of this. They are looking at a high level. How do I migrate from my SaaS or into the consumption business model? Now, these are the challenges they have. How do I get my revenue forecast? How do I get my billing forecast? Because they need to understand the cash flow. Without billing forecast, they can't do the cash flow. Without revenue forecast, they can give the numbers to the Wall Street. So there are different things they need to understand. And then there's a bigger picture, much bigger picture is how is this going to impact my overall revenue numbers? Because shifting from SaaS to consumption is not an easy thing. It can take you down on the revenue numbers and slowly ramp up, but you are going to see the shift in the revenue pattern. So those are the areas where we have seen from a systems perspective as well, the CFOs have to look at the full stack and not just look at the silo stacks. Like a lot of people just focus on fixing the billing systems because they think, oh, if I do the billing and I get the money in, I'm good. But then you're leaving the accountants scramble to get the right revenue recognition. Similar way, you can get the billing going very well, but if you didn't do the CPQ right, then it can mess up with the billing because the billing systems need the right contracted information to rate your consumption data so that they can bill the customer properly. So we kind of tell from a system perspective, look at the full stack, not at the silo stack, and try to automate as much as possible because things can get super complicated and the data volume will really delay your close process because your team will take days and days, weeks and multiple weeks to even close your books.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. Looking at it from the full picture versus in those silos, to be able to get a better grasp of the whole process and everything that you need to put in place. So, fantastic advice. So, I think with that, I'd like to thank Jagan for joining today. Great talking with you, and we hope to see people on the next episode of the podcast.